and to fortify each other. So we're so thrilled and so happy to see all of you this morning. It's a cold morning, but guess what? We're here. So I've got the privilege of just welcoming you all. We've got an amazing MC this morning, Ntokozo. She is has been one of the ladies that has been coming to our sessions since we started, so we're very excited. And please just remember, this platform is for all of us, ladies.
Sorry, people online, we have the room is muted. We're just sorting that out now. Thank you.
Hour, we're probably going to make it shorter to 30 minutes so that we catch up on time. So please just help us out and just bear with us. If we do run over time for the people online, I know that people have got commitments. It's a Saturday. Please forgive us. I want to apologize up front. It's not our intention, but sometimes the conversations are so rich that you can't kind of cut it short. So I just want to say, please allow at least 30 minutes after the time that we're supposed to finish. So without taking any more time, over to you.
Thank you so much, Judith. I think this for online.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Judith. Good morning, ladies. It's so lovely to see all of you, so beautiful and nice and warm on a cold day. My name is Nondozo Mangugu. I will be your MC today. I'm a serial entrepreneur, industrialist for now. I don't know where I'll be in the next 5 years. I might, shift. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I would like to ask Muhu to come and just introduce or tell us a bit about EmpowerWorks. Over to you.
Good morning, ladies. Is this audible? Okay. My name is Moho. It's okay. My name is Moho, and I stand here to represent EmpowerWorks. It's an honor to stand before all of you as a representative of EmpowerWorks in this gathering of brilliant women, of women on boards. Your presence here is a testament to the power of collective influence, and we are deeply grateful for the opportunity to learn and grow with you. I would like to share some information on our upcoming Empower Women 9th Annual Leadership Summit, and I would also like to invite those who have not yet bought their tickets. Empower Women is taking place on Saturday, the 30th of August at the Forum in Bryanston, an event that will look that we look very much forward to and seeing all of you there. This year's Empower Women has 10 sector stages ranging from media, film, energy, beauty, health, fashion and wellness, transport and infrastructure, finance, agriculture, amongst others. Empower Women is not just a platform, it's a movement of influence, ownership, unshakable sisterhood. And for over 9 years, we have been intentional about shifting the power of the lines of leadership by elevating women into spaces where decisions are made. Capital flows and culture is shaped. We're very proud of our partnership with Women on Boards, and we're thrilled to let you know that we'll be collectively curating a stage themed leadership, governance, and boards. And we look forward to seeing you all there with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Without any waste of time, we have Mark here. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. He's going to ease us into today's session, and I'm sure he'll also just enable us to, interact with him. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
I'll hand over to you, sir. Oh, you have.
So can I be heard? Or do I need that?
No, I think
No, you're all good. Thanks,
That's
Mark.
fine, okay. I want to just start off by saying it's such a privilege to be here. You know, one of my major interests through life has been leadership, and emerging from that, gender equality in leadership. And I know what has come up often in the discussions at these sessions is this challenge of women being able to take their place at the table with men, and the resistance of men to that. You know, we must feel sorry for men because they do know they are being threatened. So I understand that that's the context, and I really applaud that. And just to kick off, I'd like to tell you about one of my close friends, where all of this started, the men and women thing. One of my close friends, his grandmother was known as Lady Astor, and she was the first female parliamentarian in England. And some of these things are thought to be urban legends, but it's true. So she was the first female parliamentarian when Churchill was leading the whole of Parliament in the UK. And the kind of dialogue that went was like this. Churchill said to her, having a woman in Parliament is like having a woman in the men's locker room. One of her responses to him was, sir, if you were my husband, I would put poison in your drink. And he said, his response was, as if you were my wife, I would drink it. So in a sense, that's really the beginning of where all of that started. A mix of things, just briefly about me. There's a slide which I think will come up. Anyway, I'll just talk to that. Briefly about me, 25 years in corporate leadership, listed companies, multinationals, multiple geographies, industries. And so that was the first part of my life, and that is where I got to understand the areas that you're looking at the moment. The second part, 20 years outside of corporate as an activist for tangible systemic change, education, economic, social sustainability, energy, climate change, and various other things. And along the way, I'm a co-founder and I'm the CEO of Chapter Zero Southern Africa, co-founder with Delia on Chapter Zero. So that's just the background to me. What I'd like to just make a point is the focus on this issue of sustainability and climate change. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not be aware, but the importance of sustainability, which includes climate change issues, is really the following. The pace at which humanity is consuming the resources of the planet is running at close to twice the volume of which the planet can resuscitate every year. So by 2030, in order for us to sustain as humanity the way we are living and the way we are consuming what the earth can produce, if we wanted to have stability, we would need 2 Earths to support our way of life. And in fact, by 2050, we're going to need 3 Earths to support our way of life. So this isn't just about climate change. This is actually the way in which we are consuming the resources that the Earth provides for us. So it's a very, very serious issue. And of course, we're understanding it now, a little too late, but we really have to focus on doing something about it. Now, who's going to do that about it? We can roughly divide the world into 2 kinds of activity. It's government and it's business. And once a year, they have a giant cocktail party, the biggest cocktail party in the world, in November, and they call it COP. And you have 70,000 people arriving for the biggest cocktail party, and there's government and business. And what happens is at the beginning, particularly governments, come to COP and they make all sorts of promises or the commitments they're going to uphold. And then by the end of the COP conference, and in fact in the next month or two after that, most of the governments renege on that commitment. And there's a very, very logical reason for that. Democratically elected governments, who tend to be the ones making the aggressive promises, they have a short term in office, and it's very hard for them to do anything which will make them unpopular with their constituency. So that is why, to a large extent, they renege. The governments who have the power where they don't have to renege are autocracies or dictatorships, because they don't worry about what the population think. And but generally, the dictatorships are actually not interested in the climate, they're interested in themselves. But the ideal government structure, if you want government to support, so the democratically elected governments have huge difficulty because it's unpopular what they do at home. The autocratic or dictatorial ones have the power, but are generally not interested in themselves. They're only interested in themselves. But there's an example I just want to share with you because it's extraordinary, and that is China. So the leadership of China is autocratic. One may say it's almost dictatorial. But the leader of China, Xi Jinping, actually is really interested in the future of his people and his country. And he has taken a view that this sustainability and climate change is important. So the amount of investment that China has made into renewable energy dwarfs by significant quantum the rest of the world put together. So actually China is actually the leader in development of renewable energy because they have a government leadership that's understood it. Okay, let's go back to government and business. So we go to COP, we have a giant cocktail party, and government renege. But so what is left? It's in the hands of business to really make that difference in terms of dealing with sustainability, climate change action. And we are looking to business to do that. Now, historically, business leaders were focused on shareholder primacy. So returns to shareholders, you didn't worry about anything else. And I'll touch on this just now. But what we have to do as business leaders, we've got to make sure that we embed into all of our activities an understanding of the importance of climate change. Okay, I'll come back to that. But that's an important context. And I just wanted you to understand how serious all of this is. So I don't know if the screen, if we're able to share on the screen yet.
Yeah, Carolyn, please just confirm if you can see the slides.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Can they see the slides? We can't see the slides in the room. Okay.
So the specific, yeah, so there's that one.
It's the second one. The one, yes, that one. Thanks, Anita.
Okay, so that was just my story. If we go to the next one, the specific angle I want to talk about today, which is of relevance, is this question of, and it's a particular angle, but it's really just interesting in relation to being on the board. So, and that's the question of crisis communication when we deal with issues. Because if we are sitting on boards, if we go to the next one, the functioning of a well-executed governance is very process and structure driven, and it moves along very, very smoothly. And we have our board meetings and we have our subcommittee meetings and we prepare our minutes and we go through that process. And that's all fine until at midnight one night you receive a call from your chairman, say, we've got a problem. Can you please be at a crisis board meeting in 2 hours' time because we have a problem. So that is really what we're talking about here. And when you sit on boards, listed companies, public entities, there will always be something like that. It's guaranteed. Okay, next slide. Just to pivot for a little bit, the evolution of governance is really interesting to where governance is predominant. And we really owe so much to Professor Mervyn King, who is a patron of our of Chapter 0 Southern Africa. And in fact, on Monday, they are opening the Mervyn King School of Governance at Wits University, at Wits Business School. And really, he is a global phenomenon. And the work that he's done over the last 20, 30 years globally is phenomenal. So just going through that quickly, through his King Commissions and various other things, what he did is he changed the positioning of the board from really just being focused on business to actually one of governance. He defined what governance is. And in that process, it was a progression of moving from focusing purely on the shareholder and shareholder primacy to actually looking at stakeholder primacy. In other words, looking at the entire community that is part of the business world. It's not just about shareholder returns. It's about many, many other things. And importantly, he delineated the difference between the process of running a business and the process of governance, where governance has to look at a much bigger world than just the delivery of the business. And I know that all of you are aspiring or already are involved in those governance roles. The predominance of governance introduced issues of importance of compliance, regulatory accountability, ethical and responsible business practices, serving the interests of all stakeholders. And what's come into that lately is the importance of, we talk about climate governance, but in fact, it's about sustainability. So, Mervyn is our hero. So you've got two heroes here today. The first one's Lady Esther. Let's not forget about her. And the second one is Mervyn. Okay, so that's what governance is about. And I know that that's a big issue here. Let's just go to the next slide. Okay, now we come to crisis, to the focus on crisis communication. And it's a sliver of the thing, but it's just one which is quite interesting. So whatever entity we're involved with, and we're involved in governance, there are unforeseen and incalculable risks which will emerge from left field and in many, many ways can't be predicted. There are those that we can predict, but often the problem is the midnight call is something which nobody really predicted. And it comes from various places, but inevitably it's the ones that are problematic are the result of either negligence or recklessness or willful conduct. If it's not those, that means there's been no integrity or ethical issues, and it can be addressed in the way we communicate to the outside world. The problems occur when it is one of these things, which means there has been bad behavior on the part of people in the company, on the board, or people we're working with. And at the end of the day, the governance entity is going to have to hold responsibility for this, communicate with it, with the world on it, and address it. And in fact, we just have to look at our newsreel every single day in South Africa. What a wonderful place to learn about crisis communications. And almost all of it is either because of negligence, recklessness, or willful conduct. And what we see is just such poor communication, it's appalling. But anyway, so it's a very big part of what we do here, particularly in the public sector, but equally in the private sector. So, and the real storm is when you are able to get one of the first 3 articles published in News 24 the next morning, which is where there is media interest, because they're just trying to sell media space. So that's really the issue we're dealing with around crisis communications. Let's just go to the next slide, please. Now, this isn't my genius. There's many strategies that lists of strategies, but that are on the internet. But if you are dealing with crisis communication, and by the way, I would strongly recommend, if you are in any way in a governance position at an entity, it's much better to have understood this before that midnight call. Because when you go into the midnight call, then you are prepared for it. And of course, these things are logical and they make sense. The principles widely agreed. You must communicate rapidly. You must communicate in person. Don't send a spokesman. You must adopt credible and responsible transparency. And you've got to reflect compassion, empathy, respect, avoid attribution of blame, etc., etc. You know, one of the most prominent failures of this that we all experienced was the listeriosis thing, where in fact, at the time, the board of Tiger Brands, they went straight to their lawyers. And so they didn't communicate, and they took the advice of their lawyers how to communicate, which was the worst advice anyone could have taken. Because if we go to the next slide, where we can talk about the challenges. So the challenges of the way we communicate, which add complexity, are this. The lawyers, legal, financial, say, do not say anything. Make no comment, because you don't want to create the possibility of liability for saying something you shouldn't. The marketing branding people will say, to hell with that, total transparency. Let's just go and put it all out there for everyone to see. And you know, and you in a governance position is saying, well, what do I do here? You've got the human capital guys who are saying, we don't care about that. What we want to do is protect workers' rights and interests and ensure they don't lose their jobs. Shareholders and your investor advisory group is saying, we don't care what you do and whether you're liable or not. We just don't want to in any way reduce shareholder value. So, and then on top of all that, there's dominant personalities. So if you happen to be on a board where these things are trying to work, but actually there's a very, very strong personality who's on the board who overrides all of this, so you then land up in this incredible mess. Okay, so that's the basis of crisis communications. There's ways to deal with it, the inherent challenges, and what I would strongly recommend in any leadership group that you're part of is that you've understood this, because it's not a question of if you will have a crisis. It's only a question of when. And crises they are lovely, what would I call them? They're lovely animals. They love to come along on a convergent basis. So when you're dealing with one giant crisis, that's when the other one will pitch up at the same time. So this thing, actually, in terms of maintaining the integrity and the profile of your board, is really important. If we devolve down into the personal situation, you are tainted or you are tarred with the brush of the board you serve on. And just, it's important to bear that in mind. You know, often we get caught up in things which we just could never have even envisaged. And just one quick example from my side, if I go back a number of years, probably 20 odd years, I was on the remunerations committee as a non-executive director on 2 big listed entities. And as the remunerations committee, we opted for a very aggressive incentive structure for the executive teams. We cut back on their guaranteed packages, and we gave them a very, very aggressive incentive structure, which is really good for the business. It just so happened that year, 3 of the major institutional shareholders, which were like Old Mutual, Sanlam, decided that they're going to tackle executive remuneration because they're earning too much. So they came to those 2 board meetings and they voted against that. because they said these people would be earning too much, despite the fact it was incentive-based. And although they didn't carry a majority and the remuneration went ahead, it was recorded. About 4 years later, I went to list one of the companies that I successfully listed, and we approached HSBC to be our sponsors in the listing. And they came back and they said, look, there are a couple of reasons why we're turning it down, but one of them is you were on the remunerations committee of those two companies when those institutions voted against it, and we just can't afford the reputational risk. So, you know, and that's just, so whatever we're involved with, understand it goes with us, and it's very hard to separate from that.
So Mark, can I ask a question? So obviously it's stated about what you need to do to kind of avoid the three elements that you mentioned. But I mean, the world is unpredictable. So how else as a board member can you prepare for it? And there's no real media training most of the time. So how else? What else can you do?
What I would suggest, because you never know what's going to happen. You know, one of the things we do as Chapter Zero is we work with boards, and we call it on a learning program to capacitate them for things they may know nothing about. I would strongly suggest that one of those learning programs, which may just be an hour in one of the board meetings, is you bring in an outside, because you can't teach yourself, no one will believe you. Bring in just an independent facilitator to go through these points to say, look, when we have a crisis, here are some points we really need to know about and think about. So when we then talk to the crisis, then we've got some construct in our mind. What I did in this, and we won't do it now, but I created a board, a simulation. So, you know, what we would do is divide into few groups and give you a simulated situation. I just want, because this was in relation to climate change, this was the simulation scenario, which was based in some ways on a real event. And so the one scenario was multinational mining company tailings dam containing unprocessed waste collapses. And you have casualties, workforce, 30 fatalities, downstream, 500 community members missing, destruction of downstream environmentally sensitive ecosystems. Community safety concerns have been ventilated in the local media over many months or years, and the mining company employed specialists who came and said, no, there's no problem. And then you've got the disaffected employees who said, no, we kept telling them about that. Now that all happens, it's in the media on Monday morning, all these people died, all this stuff happened. How are you going to respond to that? That was the one. The second scenario which I put forward was, so you bring groups together, you bring your board together, and you use the scenario, and be interesting in doing that scenario simulation. What will emerge is these conflicts between legal and marketing and all of that, and it really just gives everyone a sense of it. The second one, which was different, was a global processing company, and actually it did happen. We're confronted with mainstream media report for the launch of a class action suit based on simultaneously publishing investigative reports about the use of child labor in producing their goods in Nigeria. But the fact is they're selling their products globally, and if they don't deal with this, they're going to lose major markets. And what's more is just before that, they'd come out with a strong statement to say that they'd investigated this and they can absolutely guarantee they're not using child labor. Okay, so in answer to your question, simulation and to work through it before, so it's not a surprise. Okay, so that was the story around crisis communication, and there are many angles of board learning. You know, the concept of sustainability in board learning is really, really important, and most board members don't understand that. By the way, I want to just make this point, and it has to do with, and some of you heard me mention before, men are capacitated and in fact are incapacitated because they are all imbued with a thing called testosterone. So that drives their behavior in a particular way. Women don't have the privilege and the handicap of that, so they have a different view of what's important in the world. In my engagement with the global Chapter Zero organization, which is working in 74 countries around the world with over 100,000 business leaders, about 80 to 85% of my colleagues globally are women. The men are very few and far between, mainly older men because they are there by virtue of seniority. But that's just an interesting reflection for me. It just talks to that. Okay, so let me just stop there and can ask and for questions on anything. I have an opinion on everything.
So we've got a roving mic. We can start with the room and then we'll move on to the people online. Anybody with a question?
Thank you. My name is Mashuto. My question is, in the instance where you sit on a board and let's say...
So, sorry, are you able to say that? Speak a bit louder or...
Oh, my face.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is this better now?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Mashuto. And my question is, in the instance where you sit on a board where I'll relate it to something we're all familiar with, the EXCO members are very similar in character to what we have in the US in terms of...
Yes.
Yeah. And as a board, you've got a strategy that you've all committed to. What do you do in that instance? Almost curtail, let's say, in a communication, how they represent the company. What do you do? What powers do you have as a board?
So you're saying that the prevailing culture of the board is, say, an older culture of men?
So the EXCO is the challenge, where EXCO is very personality I can equate it to the US president.
So the EXCO are the thing, and you're on the board, and you're trying to communicate.
And we are battling to say, how do we curtail that behavior?
Okay. So, you know, of course, behavior change actually is what we're talking about here with everything. It's all about behavior change. As Chapter Zero, we're saying, how do we change behavior? And I just want to say, in one of the previous of these events I attended, where there was this question, and it's not what you asked, but it's the same. If you are now a woman, now you are on this board, and you arrive at the board meeting, and you're the first woman they have had on the board. And what they're worrying about is, did you bring your lipstick? And because you're not taken seriously in terms of that, and and that's where they come from. It's not that it's right or wrong. And what you're going to have to then deal with, how do you make yourself felt in that, and what is the right strategy to try and make your way there? And it is problematic, because if you feel strongly and you want to try and make that work, and you land up in a level of conflict, it's unlikely you're going to win that. But it's important that you stay the distance and work out how to do it. And in fact, in that previous one, I provided the following example. As women, generally, we land up with the role of parenting. Now, there are two skill sets we never really train for in life. One is parenting, and the other one's leadership. Now, the strategy in parenting is, if you take advice on it, you never ever, if you can avoid it, set up a power struggle with your child, because you are going to lose. You are never going to win that. You're going to lose. It may take a long time, but you're going to lose. The only way to handle children, you don't deal with the issues in a power struggle. You create a deviation or a pivot where you get the same outcome, but empowering them with achieving the results you want without having the power struggle. A power struggle is hiding to nothing. And dealing with men and testosterone, when you got that situation on the board, is exactly the same as dealing with children. And I apologize to anyone I've offended who's on the call. It's exactly the same thing. A power struggle, you never do a power struggle. You've got to find another way around that. And it just, so the behavior change with your exco, you've got to, and very often it's useful to bring in an external facilitator, because then that removes any of the emotion from going through that. And the external facilitator, even if you're instructing them, but they don't tell anyone that you're instructing them, they can design an intervention which would help everyone move further down the road.
Any further questions? There's a question over there.
Thank you. My name is Lerato. My question is, you've mentioned something which is interesting that I've seen, that you'd find yourself perhaps serving in a board of Tongat or what's the other one? The Listeriosis board, the Tiger Brands. And then there's something that then happens. How do you then rebrand yourself? Because you'd see some companies saying that, this person served on this board, then we don't want to do anything with them. So how do you then rebrand yourself, having served on that board?
So yes, so that is such a difficult thing, because you immediately connected to whatever, and often it's what you connected to and the way it's represented in the media happens to be partially fabricated anyway. So that is a really, really, it's a really difficult question. And the fact that you may have been the only person on the board to vote against whatever action was taken doesn't really help you. And there's something else. Before I answer your question, the other thing is, if you are reflected as a white knight, is the word they use. So if you are the person on the board who voted against that thing, even if you were right, and even if 5 years later it emerges you were right, what happens is you get a reputation as a troublemaker. You're a troublemaker, you stir up all this stuff, and then what that means is the next board appointment which you're looking at, they're saying, well, you know what, this, I know this lady personally, but she's a troublemaker. She's very authentic, and it makes it very difficult. So there's no right or wrong answer, and of course you have to be respectful of the confidentialities around boards. So if the board votes to do something which is appalling and you vote against it, you can't go out and put a statement in the media to say, look, I voted against this. You can't. You've got to go with the board. So it is very difficult. But I would suggest that, one of the things you might do is resign. But without tabling the reason for your resignation, you just say, too busy, too many interests. But of course, if you resign and you haven't been there long, that may raise other questions. So managing your public persona is really, really difficult. And I just have to, my advice to all of you is not to do what I do, which is make provocative statements on public forums, but to just be very measured in the way you respond to things. Just know that your integrity is intact. And when you then are in a dialogue with somebody, not in the media, but with somebody where you are talking about your career or about, you can table on a confidential basis that this was the reason why you resigned, because it conflicted with your integrity.
Maybe just a comment. If you remember the discussion we had with this meme, she was talking about how when you go for an interview or when you're being pursued to join a board, it's a two-way street. So you need to do your due diligence. And most of the time, the warning flags are there. And people kind of want to ignore them, especially when you're kind of trying to get into the market. You know, you're kind of quite desperate to get on any board. So just remember that being a board member, I mean, that record doesn't get obliterated. It doesn't matter whether you resigned, you know, so just kind of do your due diligence and make sure that the brand that you're associating yourself with is one that, you know, you're proud of, you know, that they won't kind of get into any unsavory issues. Yeah, so that's, I think for me, that was a great takeaway to say, wow, if I do get an opportunity to be interviewed, it has to be a two-way street.
Judith, can I add to that?
Yeah.
Because I've helped a lot of people in this interview process at very high level. The challenge is the following. You are either being interviewed by an executive search specialist who doesn't really understand the business, and they have a set of questions they're taking you through together with other candidates. And they don't really have an intuitive sense of whether you're right or wrong. It's either that, or it's an executive at the company who has their own particular angle that they're looking at. So the question is, how do you differentiate yourself from the other candidates? So it's not just down to appearance. How do you differentiate yourselves? And this is really important. So what Judith said in terms of preparation, it's very useful to do preparation and to find 2 or 3 really challenging questions at a strategic level that you put to them. So once they've done their interview and they've asked you all their questions, then to put to them, look, I'm really interested in this space. I've got 2 or 3 questions which I'd really be interested to hear your view. And it may relate to the industry that they're in. It may relate to geopolitics in relation to the industry. But what that does, it positions you as being on a strategic level and understanding. So it's always about, in the interviews, how do you differentiate yourself from any of the other candidates? Okay.
We have an online question. It says, how do you balance the mandate and strategy for parastatals versus the political mandates, e.g. events that occur in Parliament? What is the best practice in the implementation of Parliament reports by parastatals?
So just read that again, because that's a very complicated question.
Okay. How do you balance the mandate or the strategy for parastatals versus political mandates and e.g., she's saying, events that occur in Parliament?
Okay, so, and she's referring to public sector entities, parastatals. And so that is a conundrum which, you see, if you were in the private sector, it would be very clear. Your mandate is set out by your shareholders, by your board, by the intent of the business. And if your mandate does come into conflict with government policy, that's something you would have to navigate. When you are in a parastatal, the complexity in a parastatal is that apart from perhaps the inherent conflict of the mandate of the parastatal in relation to what is taking place in Parliament, the challenge we have, and it's not only in this country, it's in every country. In this country, it's particularly problematic, but there are vested interests in the way our parastatal economy has been shaped, where it becomes very difficult to maintain your integrity and your truth to the mandate of the parastatal, because there are private vested interests sitting outside of that. So on the one hand, if it's just the mandate is different to an act of Parliament, one has to navigate that. If it is that your mandate is now a problem to vested interests that is very, very difficult. And that's when you have to take the route of an Mcebisi Jonas or various others and say, this is untenable for me. I don't know where it's taking me, and I need to leave this. But that may result in unemployment and impoverishment. So it's a very tough one. But at the end of the day, that is a call you have to make. You know, there's no real answer to that. And there are 1,000 examples of that every day, that really, really very competent people in our parastatals are having to wrestle with. I hope that answer was okay, and I hope it didn't target me.
So
Anyone.
do you have your question? Yeah. Okay, so we've got our next speaker, so we're just going to allow 2 questions, Mark, and then we can call it a wrap. Alice has got another difficult question. She says, when there is a crisis, when there is a crisis and the majority of the board members opt to resign, surely that is detrimental to the company, obviously. How can these resignations be stopped till there's stability and accountability?
Wow.
That's a difficult one. And the next one is from Natasha.
Hi, Natasha. Mark. So we were talking about the reputation of entities and how that follows one. So just to comment on that, I like to call it follow me roles and responsibilities, and also follow me liability. So my comment is that directors or any board members, just remember everything that you do in the room follows you. My question to you is, what is your view on, especially listed entities, recycling, more especially women board members? So you'll have a board member that serves for 7 to 9 years on one board and has an automatic entrance on another board. Similar also in the same sector. And do you think companies has got some sort of fear towards allowing a new entrant as a board member?
Okay, very good question. Inherently, humanity is resistant to change. And, you know, looking at my own journey, I have become an outlier because the older, as we age, we become more and more resistant to change. And the fact of the matter and the reality is that change is accelerating in every possible way. So there's no question in my mind that it's really important to keep change moving through your boards. But one has to balance that with institutional memory, which is also really important. And it's very difficult because institutional memory is in itself an opposition to change. So it's really, really difficult. And, you know, evidence is there are very few global, local, major corporates that are around for more than 10 years or 15 years because they were unable to embrace change. And there are 1,000 fantastic examples of that. So, but my view is there's no question. You have to balance institutional memory, but there has to be change, and you have to be doing that. And you know, the story of what you're talking about in terms of keeping a corporate life. I mean, it goes through every organization where you've got leadership, right up to our cabinet members. I mean, we really need to be, because there's so much new. Here, when he was sitting here a few sessions, the only thing that counts is integrity. Whatever you do, it's got to be covered by your integrity. Thank you very much. I hope that was a good addition.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate it. We've learned a lot. Our guest is here. Can she please come up?
You put your guest in the hot seat here.
Just mic up. Can I just quickly mic you?
While they are miking our guest, I'd just like to acknowledge Natasha. I know she's already asked the question. Natasha, she's got her art outside on exhibition, and her art name, or how she signs her art, is Georgia Cami. And she also has an art gallery, Milan Art Institute. She's been doing this for 8 years, and she specializes in oil paint and charcoal sketches. So during the break, please go out and see and view her art outside. It's exhibited there. And I was asked where are the flowers, to just give her the. It's just to say thank you for the exhibition.
Oh,
Thank you
so much.
Very beautiful work outside.
It is.
Thank you.
So she will also be conducting the Fireside chat today. I'll just read a bit about her. Okay, I think I'll leave it because she's, she'll tell us a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to read. We have our honorable guest here, Miss Happy Ralinala. Thank you so much for coming through. I'm just going to read a profile. Happy Ralinala is a director of Balisambali Group. Her last executive role was managing executive of private and wealth banking segments of Barclays Africa Group, where she held numerous senior roles, including managing executive of business banking South Africa. One of her many successes includes being voted the best SME bank in South Africa by Capital Finance International. While she was managing executive of business banking South Africa and Barclays Africa Group. She holds a master in philosophy in international business, masters of business administration, and won Barclays Global Business Woman of the Year award in 2015. There's a lot, and we would love to just hear more. Over to you, Natasha.
Sorry. I just want to say we're so privileged to have you here. And Happy is one of those real trailblazers for women. So I just want to acknowledge you. She actually had a bit of a personal crisis, but she still came for us. So thank you. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you. Can we not talk about it? It's a crisis that breaks me down. So can we just pretend it doesn't exist? Because I'm here.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for joining us. So good morning, beautiful ladies and gent. Is still around? Yeah. And gent. So today's conversation is not about titles. It's not about governance frameworks and policies and the written rules or board packs. It's about something far more elusive and far more powerful. It's about the unwritten rules of the boardroom. And how do we influence those? The kind that we don't get taught in our MBA programs or any undergrad, the kind that only you would learn by entering the boardroom, paying attention and being present. So we know about the triple P from King 1 up until King 4 and now King 5 on our heels. But today we talk about our triple P, power, presence, and positioning. These are not only just buzzwords, but they are strategic currencies. And to guide us through this breakthrough breakthrough moment. We've been joined by someone who has mastered the art of silent influence, who understands not just what's said in the boardroom, but also what is not said. Please join me in welcoming someone who pulls back the curtain on the boardroom dynamics today, Miss Happy Ralinala.
Thank you.
So without any further ado, we have our topic that we have decided on. And we're going to talk about breaking through the boundaries of boardrooms. So my first question to you, as Happy, is in your experience in boardrooms, what are the biggest unspoken rules that you've come across that no one tells you about or warns you about, but everybody expects that you're supposed to know?
I think the unspoken rule, which then gets to be a silent rule, is the issue of independence and independence of mind. You know, we talk about independence, but the independence of mind. And when you talk about the independence of mind, really talks to when, what, and how. And really talks to when to speak, what to say, but mostly, how do you, and especially as a woman, influence in the boardroom, outside the boardroom, and really talks to one, the language, the body posture, but most of all is how do you then bring all of these together in a very succinct way that does not change you as a woman. The challenge with everybody is that everybody wants to fit in. Everybody has had what it needs to be in the boardroom. Actually, one of the key examples I can tell you is that everybody walks into that boardroom wanting to make an impact. I've arrived here first day, I must say something, and sometimes you just come in and listen. Because listening, especially in your first day in a board appointment, it's for you to take in, understand the nuance in the environment, understand the table dynamics, because there are board table dynamics. There are people who've got strong voices, there are people who've got soft voices, and you do not have to be loud. You do not have to lose yourself. You don't have to impress anybody. You just have to come in and be authentically you, knowing that you've brought the expertise, the skills, but mostly the boardroom environment is a learning environment too. What you knew yesterday might not apply the next day because things change. And when I was here and I just walked in, I heard the previous speaker talking about change. And change is fast pacing the institutions. We're in a digital age. So therefore, you just have to come in and just be authentically you.
Oh, thank you so much. I was happy for that. So you've touched on how we can walk into a boardroom confidently present and not say a word and own the space. On that, what does the executive presence actually look like in practice?
So the executive presence, firstly, is the one that understands the two dynamics. There's an executive, there's a board, there's other stakeholders. So when you just talk about those three, your stakeholder is a shareholder, your stakeholder is the public, the stakeholder. The executive presence is the EQ. We always want to bring in the skill and be technical about everything. But sometimes it's the emotional intelligence that we need to bring into the room. But also it is the AQ, the quotient for you to be able to adapt. That sometimes as an executive, the board acknowledges that you are an SME. But sometimes the board is your principal. And that these relationships interchangeably influence each other. But what most of us, and I'll say it because it's my learning for me too, is self-development is a big part of what executives need to take on. What books you read? What do you listen to? And some of the stuff we listen to are not the stuff that builds. It's the stuff that fuels our egos. And the ego does not exist in the boardroom, especially as an executive, but also as a board. It is this partnership that comes through. And earlier on, I spoke about knowing when to speak, what to say. And sometimes you don't have to speak the whole meeting. But whatever you would have said at a specific point in time becomes impactful, becomes meaningful, because you're not competing to speak, but you're listening attentively to be able to put all things together. And executives are also teachers to board because they're SMEs. On the other side, the board also has a responsibility to do that.
So what we're hearing is change, adaptability, and self-development, and that executive management and board members and other stakeholders, even the staff, there's a partnership streaming through. So as a practicing company secretary for 26 years, I've seen that very often directors confuse being invited to the table and having power at the table. What's your view on that?
I think the issue of being invited on the table and the issue of the power in the table talks to who invites you on the table. For what agenda do they invite you to the table? But mostly your association with that table, right? So who invites you to the table? I'll talk to the trends maybe that we see around. There are circles and cliques of board members, tight-knit, that move in sync with one another, right? And always what I question is the independence of those boards. But secondly, it's not also about the invitation, it's about how you raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, and for what do you raise your hand for? So there is an issue of an intent, because the intent talks to what is it when I get there that I would like to achieve? Does this align with me, my values? But most of all, I think you all know that when you are when the board invites, it has to invite diverse set of skills, because it is an expectation from the board to have a specific composition for a specific industry, for a specific. So therefore, you being invited to the table does not mean you need to oblige. It doesn't mean you have to fit in. But also you need to know your worth. You'll find somebody who's been around here, who've been around as a first-time board member, or even as an experienced board member. You just have to find a way of commanding your space. But that starts with self. It starts with self-awareness, which is a key skill, a key trait that each and every leader must have, that you're just self-aware, and it just talks to emotional intelligence. So at the center of everything, it's just the core that says, how do you go and want to give oxygen to a big institution or organization when you yourself lack the very same oxygen?
Absolutely profound. I was happy. So we see some subtle power plays that happens in the boardroom. And to your earlier point, we have clickism in boards, and they move around like it's a waltz, you know, even if they haven't prepped, it's just in step. How would you advise leaders and board members to respond without losing grace or ground?
Please repeat yourself.
So we have subtle power plays in the boardroom, and from time to time, the person or the director or the board member outside of the clique wants to respond to the observation. How would you advise the outside board member responds or shows up without losing grace or ground?
So there's a book called Art of War. Right? The Art of War. I think it talks to the EQ and the ability to be able to engage at a certain level. So one of the key traits that a board member needs to have is the trait of influence. You have an ability to engage board members one-on-one. You have an opportunity to be able to get to know the individuals better. And I would encourage that sometimes when you identify something, you don't walk away from it. It also talks to the timing, the place, who, and when. We often, especially in our young age, and I'll talk about in my young age specifically, and I really had a benefit of starting to be a board member from a school. So when you participate from a school side of things, as a parent, you also have this intent of wanting to make the school do well. My child is here, you invested, right? So you want the school to do well, but you also have parents who also are very senior, they have authority, and at that time I was looking at it from also an inclusive environment. An inclusive environment that says teachers are very influential. I'd like to see Black teachers at the school because children look up to their teachers, they become their role models. So therefore, how do you then at that time start introducing a narrative that says, can we please start introducing Black teachers in this school so that my daughter can have a role model? It took me a session where I went to each and every board member, one by one, coffee. Let's talk about what it would mean. But also just to share the changing population around the school. So if this is a private school and you want to attract this changing population, you must also talk to the needs of this population. So you can't just switch on, but you have to be tactical around what you want to achieve. It really is the art of war. You just don't open yourself vulnerably to a space where you don't know what response you're going to get back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And most responses kill your soul. I can tell you, because nobody has a responsibility of protecting you. You have a responsibility of protecting yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what is it that you can absorb and what is it that you can't absorb. What is it that you can tolerate and what is it that you can tolerate. You know what's a deal maker for you and what's a deal breaker for you. And as a board member, and especially as a female, you need to know what are deal makers. You know, one of the benefits I had, I've transitioned in my career. I've had many careers. Maybe I share this with you. I qualified as a nurse. And yes, I qualified as a nurse. At 21, I was a registered nurse. I'd qualified from Baragwanath Hospital. 1994 happened. I saw an opportunity for a change because 1994 presented opportunities for Black people at the time. So therefore, that change came through. And that change meant that I go into financial services. I'll talk about that transition. And the health finances I went to was healthcare financing, medical aid. That because I had a healthcare skill, right? I had a medical skill. So I transitioned. But I then get an opportunity when I had moved and I'd worked for Discovery. I then worked for Tebi. I joined Discovery when they were small. When they just started, Adrian used to be on the first floor. We used to be on the ground. You'll meet him coming up and down at the time and all of that. But let me move away from that. Then I transitioned to medical, to F&B. And I remember coming back and I said to my husband, I've been invited to join F&B. An executive search company had called me. Can you believe? He says, for what? And I say, I'm going to listen to them. I want to. Healthcare and banking, what you going to do? You know, he asked me and genuinely asking me, hi, what is it that you want to do now? You know? But the reality is the transitioning of one from being what you've been yesterday needs fuel. Proper psychological fuel. It talks about how do you best equip yourself. Because the war is not won physically.
Yeah.
We are in a psychological, mental, and emotional. Because once you lose your confidence at that moment in time, it takes a lot for you to do a comeback. That's the art of war. So you have to capacitate yourself with those skills. And on a day-to-day basis, tell yourself, I am going to win. And I know, but also it talks to you about how you plan. And sometimes the plan does not work. And sometimes the plan does not succeed. But doesn't mean that the plan is failure. It just says it did not work at a point in time. And that point in time talks to the strength that you would have built internally.
Thanks, Safi, for that. So, coming to mind on my side is that a boardroom setup is a lot of frames. So you remember back in the day when they made movies, you know, there was different frames. And it's not based on fact. It's really us looking at ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to show up and position ourselves appropriately. And guess what? We could always just rely on self. So I really want to ask the next question. Does the game or the rules of the game in a boardroom change when we go into the golf course and when we engage via WhatsApp, when we do on phone calls? Does the same rules apply?
The reality is that we're all human beings, right?
Yeah.
So that you can't discount. And as human beings, we want to connect. But also, corporate governance does allow a point where you reflect with another board member of whether did I hear you well? Is this what is intended for? from which point were you coming from when you said that, right? But over familiarity with one another does blur. Honestly, it does blur the independence because we now are in sync with one another. We talk quite often with one another, and we've become friends. It does, you know. But how do I call you to order or caution you on something when there is this overfamiliarity? And sometimes, though, it takes a specific skill. Even when overfamiliarity exists, that you are able to, because it doesn't mean overfamiliarity means that you would not caution or call each other to order, but it says, what's my maturity as an individual to be able to deal things? Because also Boardroom Dynamics says you have to have a cordial relationship with your fellow board members. There shouldn't be any I want to say suspicion on the intent of the conversations. You have to trust the intent. It is when you have an instinct and doubt, and one of the key things that we have as women is intuition. I call it, people call it sixth sense, I call it my eighth sense. Because honestly, in environments where my eighth sense had told me something, it is real, it is tangible, it is that loud voice. And when that loud voice, everybody says it's a soft voice, it is a loud voice. Because it comes through when you are quiet, when you are sleeping, when you are in your space. Listen to it. And you know it as a woman, it's that loud voice. So in short, I think it's very, very important that there's a clear distinct around what we talk about, where we talk about things, and how we talk about them. Clear distinction. I've had somebody telling me that they were sitting at a coffee shop, and in a coffee shop, they had a whole board conversation with two people that were talking there. All right? And it really talks to when, where, and how. And I like the where, when, and how all the time, because it becomes that just one distiller for you in anything. Yeah. When to speak, when to do things, and how to do it, and with who, and what. All the time. If you just put it like that, then you are able to then sense check yourself, sense check others, but also be able to trust your own judgment. You know? Because when you make a decision and a judgment, it mustn't haunt you. You must be at peace, even if it gobbles you one day, because boards are not safe, right? That you need to know. Because the boards are not safe because also the boards talk to at a specific time, right? And what you knew then. And then everyone else comes and says in hindsight. But there was no hindsight at that present moment.
Absolutely.
It didn't exist.
Yes.
Hindsight at that present moment, it didn't exist. The biggest learning, and I'm still trying to distill, I just haven't had time. I don't know when it's going to happen. I want to go back and listen even to the Zondo Commission itself, right? Because the questions were, in hindsight, would you have? But what I had at that moment in time, I made a decision. And those decisions are human being decisions that are also influenced by my own personal emotions and psychological state at that moment and time. So these things are much trickier. I had an opportunity to attend a board governance program with Oxford last year, Oxford University or University of Oxford, one of the two. And it's a bank board governance program, I put it like that. And the bank governance program had to look at the cases of Credit Suisse. And it's one of the biggest cases, and I'm going to challenge you to just go in and read it. It challenged me in a number of ways on decision making. And if I was in that position, what would I have done? What would I have made as a board member, as an executive, as a partner of some sort, as an associate of the institution, but also as a community in that country, you know? So, and the issue of board activism happens every day, everywhere. We've seen it in South Africa coming through. You've seen environmentalists challenging financial institutions about the decisions that they make. So it is what you read, when you read it, what you subscribe to, but who are your friends? The quality of the conversations you have with your peers also changes how you play the game. Because you hear their perspectives. You hear even this environment. It's a dynamic environment. One of the key things possibly should be, how do we scale this environment? How do we invite more people on the table? Maybe we don't start these conversations with people who are executives. What's the conversation that happens at managerial level when somebody just runs a division? Because a division is a company within a company. Mm-hmm. A division is a company within a company. Mm-hmm. But also what most importantly also is that, yes, they say the board owns the culture together with management. Can you imagine if everything had to be bottom up and the staff could say the culture we want? Not the culture that's designed by leadership. Yes, you have an ideal culture, but there is a culture that everyone else think would be an ideal culture for this institution, because one, they touch all your stakeholders, they touch your customers, which are the key, but most of all, staff are key also shareholders of the business. So it is all those dynamics that when you then start looking at entities, we have to look across.
Yeah. So how are we doing for time, Judah? Oh, we're good. Okay, so you've shared so much wisdom and your experience from a nurse to healthcare and finance, and then into finance and banking and Oxford and back. What grounds you? And you mentioned earlier on that we have to be intentional about our objective, the purpose, and that has to be aligned with our values and beliefs.
Yeah.
So please share with us what do you have to drink or do or daily just to make sure that you keep yourself honest.
I was raised by very, very dynamic women. Very. Both my maternal and my paternal grandparents. I've had the best grandmothers. The best gift I've ever had. But also I've had the great mother. My mother was a taxi driver, first woman taxi driver in Soweto. But my maternal grandmother was so grounded, had humility, had unmovable faith on things. She believed. She had a quiet influence in her house. And I'll give you one of the examples. My grandfather used to say, after a function, a traditional function, slaughtering or something that would have happened, And then my grandfather, when he's sober, not that he used to drink, but I'm just saying, when he is sober and he realizes what a dynamic woman this, and he will say it. And we were grandchildren. That at that time it didn't mean anything to me. But now reflecting back, then I realized my grandfather used to say, "Hey, umama," this is my grandmother. Umama is such a gifted, intelligent woman. The only thing I just said to her is that we must do this. And in her own way, she puts it all together and she does it and everything, And if it was a traditional function and everybody came here and said, "How, Mtembu, this was amazing, this was beautiful." I didn't lift an inch. I didn't do anything. But she put it all together. And she was reserved, she was quiet, but she just made that home homely in her own way. Now, in hindsight, I realize what a dynamic woman she was. But the most important thing, she taught us to pray. She taught us to have faith in God in an amazing way. In an amazing way. My paternal grandmother had moved from KZN, this place called Glenkotandi, to come up to Joburg after her first challenging marriage. She picked up her bags, came to Joburg, and to come and look for better opportunities. And I need to tell you that my grandmother, she used to operate a computer where she used to work. And she'll come and say, everybody who comes from overseas are looking for Betty. And they come in because I do a computer. And I used to think, at that time, remember me too? I didn't know about a computer. Even when I qualified as a nurse, there was no computer in the hospital. Yes, when I went to Sizwe, the first thing I had to learn is to use what you would call a Siemens Nixdorf computer. That was the mainframe stuff. So she did. And she retires in 93, 94, around there. Having been operating that, I come from pioneering women in their own right. But they were not loud about it. They were quiet about it. But most of all, they were community builders. In any other way, they just belonged into a community of women, worked with the community of women. And that's what grounds me. What grounds me is my faith in God, believing that everything that happens, God will carry me through. It doesn't matter whether it is. My faith holds me together. And that's the faith that held the three women I identify with.
Amen. Amen. I'm gonna have one last question, Judith, if that's okay. So, with your three amazing women that you've learned from, was there any point in time that you wanted to challenge legacy thinking without being called a difficult child or a troublemaker?
And I want to, so I was not, I'm the eldest from my mother. So I was not a troublemaker. I taught the line. But towing the line, I learned a lot. Because you are expected to lead. Maybe I'll share with you the bigger lessons from my relationship, especially with my mother. As a taxi driver, my father dies, gets stabbed. My mother is a taxi driver. And my mother has to go and work. And she has these little children that she needs to leave in the house and go where? To first load in the morning, second load in the morning, right? Can come through during the day, quickly check out and drive back and everything. But there was also a community of other mothers around and really grandmothers who would come and check on us and everything. I was brought up with these sisters who used to create chaos. So I became a parent very early. And then my mother would come in and say, why is there a mess in the house? Why is the house not clean? Why is that not done and everything? Then I'll go in and say, no, she did it. She did it. She did it. And my mother would look at me and say, I left you in charge here. I left you in charge here. That leaving me in charge made me understand what accountability means, what responsibility means, but also how to lead and manage our household, in which also is what I have seen with my girls. My oldest girl is a parent to the other two. I have 3 daughters, and amazing 3 daughters, amazing gifts that God had given me, in which also continue to challenge me as a parent to reflect about what type of a parent am I. But mostly, what do I teach them? And also to acknowledge that they may and may not accept what you teach them. You know, a story of a preacher's child, that the world looks at a preacher and think the child is also a preacher, and yet a child is just a child, like any other ordinary children. But the reality is that you then get to learn. But I want to share one last thing with you. I changed to be an executive, and I have these children that I have, and stress and everything that we do follows us home, right? And you walk into the house, there are homeworks to be done, there's stuff to be done, there's everything that needs to happen. And you walk in, you want them to do the homework and quickly do everything because you still want to go and open your laptop. Because we take work home, right? Can I advise that there's only one job that you have as a parent, is parenting. You don't have a teaching skill. And if there is a way that you can outsource that teaching to someone else, let them teach your child. Yours is to create memories with your child. The trauma you bring home when you just say, do that homework, repeat 10 times 20 and everything. And you're just not skilled to do it and you don't know how. But also with familiarity, then you get into tricks with one another. But that's not the memories you want to have with your child, right? You want to have a time which is quality time. When my mom is here, she hugs me, she loves me, she tells me how important am I, how beautiful I am, not the one that says, do that, do that, do that, do that, right? It's the first thing I learned, and I thought to myself, I must choose whether I bring animosity at home or I build a relationship with the girls. They can't see me with this horrible mother, because when I walk in, then the environment changes. Choices we make.
Wow.
We have some online questions. Cassandra says, how much does governance differ in private entities versus listed entities?
I would say not much. Governance is governance. Governance is about doing things in the interest of the institution and its stakeholders. It's all in the interest of the entity and its stakeholders, listed or not listed. An NPO, a school, my little company in the interest of this legal entity. So it differs nowhere at all. And governance is conscience.
Thank you so much for that answer. Mabe Kwana says, I have noticed that lately big companies are retrenching as a result of competitive moves to enhancing technology. Is this something boards are encouraging, or is this a sign that they have failed to prepare for the future?
So it depends. Retrenchments have happened over a long time. We've seen them in the past. The issue of change and relevance is an issue of strategy. And strategy is about choices you make, what to do and what not to do at a point in time. So all these things get influenced by a lot of moving parts. You could have a strategy which is a plan that you think is solid, waterproof, intact. Bang! PTY Ltd comes through, throws you under the water. It really, there are entities who do not succeed or fail, not because they had not done something about it, but somebody comes with a competitive advantage, and which becomes a competitive advantage between what had stayed at liberty and what discovery became. Yeah. If you just know how discovery came out of liberty, you can go and read that. Discovery came out of liberty, and it's just a choices that may happen at a point in time.
The last question said, well, it's a comment, I think. The attendees are very grateful for this honesty and transparency with which Happy is sharing very valuable lessons. They're clapping, she says. But clapping online, thank you for reminding us that our feminine strength, personal mastery, is the real superpower in leadership. I think we don't have any questions in the room. I think we can close. Are you comfortable that we close here?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. This was really fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so we're going to have a brunch now, which we have to cut short. So we plan to come back 12. So you've got 20 minutes to network, have a little bit of a snack, and then come back 12. Thank you.
Thank you.
And please don't forget the art exhibition outside.
Thank you so much.
Hello, sir. Mr. Siboni, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Okay.
We can hear you. Can people in the boardroom hear us?
Can you hear us? Paul?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
Can
we
you
can.
Hello? Okay, fantastic. Okay, we can hear you. Please just see if you can move the slides.
which way? What?
Whichever way you want. I just want to see that it's working.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's all. That's good. That's good. Okay, so we're gonna be facing this side, the other way, and we can
Yes.
hear you. I'm very happy. Just please stay on. We're about to start. Everyone's just coming back inside.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Over time.
Okay. Hi, ladies. Welcome back. Welcome back. Hi. So just remember, we've got the majority of our participants online. So they've already been waiting for us for the past 7 minutes. So welcome back, everyone. We're now in the final leg, and our MC is going to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, ladies. Oh, last session was really, really amazing. I think what I took away was the when, the what, the how, and with who. You know, we're gonna carry that, you know, wherever we go. So our next speaker is Mposiboni. He's see him right there. I'll just read his bio quickly. Posibon is a member of the board, CEO, Financial Services, Private Equity and Technology, Communications, Media and Practices. He consults with leaders across industries with particular expertise in the financial services, technology, communications, and media industries. He has, you know, a wide-ranging expertise. He has a BA in economics, psychology, from McGill University in Canada, and a Master of Science in Management from Oxford University. I will hand over to Paul for the masterclass. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. And once again, thank you for inviting me and my colleagues who are in the room with you, Fungai and Nandika. Maybe they could, I can't see them, but if they could wave their hands just so that everybody who's in the room know who they are. And the best part is that I have any difficult questions, I'm going to ask them to answer. Great. So the topic today is the behavioral traits of executive and non-executive directors. And given the audience today, we have shaped the discussion to be as relevant to you as possible. And we're going to do that by covering a couple of topics. The first is to recap on what our 2024 board index indicated. Our annual board index is an analysis of activities in boards. It will shortly be available online, but we've published the results, and we will give you a sense of what they are for this year. Then coming to the roles of executive and non-executive directors, we see them as a ship and interdependently working together. We'll then speak about the characteristics of an effective board, the context in which board members are assessed, and the behaviors that make them successful. And we've distinguished between board member behaviors and leadership capabilities, which are the behaviors, the capabilities of executives. As you can imagine, because they've got different roles, board members versus executives, they need to be assessed differently. We'll then speak about the Spencer Stuart leadership model and how it influences the way in which we assess directors, non-executive and executive, and then talk about board culture, because that is actually what is most important. What's most important is what happens in the interaction between board members in the room. I don't know what the protocol is, but if you have a question as I'm going along, I think it's better if you just stop me and ask the question there, as opposed to waiting for the presentation to finish. Great. Let's then look at some of the highlights of the 2024 index, especially as they relate to women who are currently directors or who aspire to be directors. Our board index tracks the activities of the top 50 on the JSE. Obviously, we also track activities of board members on the London Stock Exchange, the DAX in Frankfurt, the New York Stock Exchange, etc. So the report that I referred to earlier, that you can access online, it'll show you South Africa versus I think 18 other countries. 37% of the directors on the JSE are women, just over 1/3. 32% are historically disadvantaged South Africans, Africans, colored, Indians, right? And 40% of non-executive directors are women. So however you look at it, it's less than 50. Technically, it's less than 40. The average tenure on JSE company boards is 6.4 years, let's say 6.5, and for women, 4.6. In other words, women stay for a shorter time on boards than their male counterparts. That creates a question, but also an opportunity. The one question is why do they stay for a shorter time? The fact that they are staying for a shorter time means, hopefully, newer entrants to the boardroom have an opportunity. And obviously, the longer you can stay, the better. 68% of non-executives serve on more than one board. I can't quite remember the actual average at 2 years, to 2 boards, 3 boards, etc. But overall, 2/3 of NEDs have more than one board role. The challenge is if they are serving on maybe 3, 4, or 5 boards, and that is quite common, are they able to make the kind of contribution to each one of those boards sufficiently? There's no magic wand, but many of our clients look at a non-executive director with 5 boards askance, where they're more encouraged when the person has maybe 2 boards or maximum 3. Listed boards. As far as attendance goes, 98% of board members actually do attend board meetings, which suggests that boardroom activity is something that they treasure and they make every effort to attend. But as you can imagine, with 68% of directors serving on more than one board, attendance might be compromised in the future. Coming to the nub of today's discussion, which is the behavioral traits of executive and non-executives. We view the boardroom as a ship. Executives keep the engine running. Non-executives provide guidance, monitor, and clear any obstacles. So two very different roles, but they are interdependent and complementary. Because they are different roles, we, as Spencer Stewart, assess them differently. But before we go into that, let's just look at the roles once again on 4 dimensions: core focus, influence style that is appropriate, contribution, and risk orientation. On the executive side, the focus, as you can imagine, is on operational leadership. Sorry, before I carry on, can you see my mouse moving?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thank you. I've just had problems earlier this week, but great, thank you. And then the board non-executives, their role, as I implied on the previous slide, is strategic oversight and governance. Somebody said in a book I read that the CEO of Microsoft, right, Satya Nadella, he said the role of the chairman is to judge the judgment of the CEO. And you can extend that thinking to the board. The role of the board is to judge the judgment of executives. It's not to get operationally involved in the decisions, but to review and advise on decisions to take. The influence style or the behavior that is most important, as an executive director, direct authority is that's how executives execute their tasks. And by direct authority, I don't mean authoritarianism. I just mean they have the power to be bold and influential and directly in their spheres of influence. The board exercises indirect influence through the same mechanism of probing and suggesting and counseling management. The key contribution source for executives is through people and task delivery. The board's key contribution is around strategy and the challenge around strategy, plus assurance from a governance and risk perspective. Lastly, risk orientation of the executives. Executives prize risk taking. The board assesses the quality of the risk taken through governance and applying risk mitigation strategies. Any thoughts or questions before I go on? I forgot to say, I had every intention of coming to do this presentation physically. My flight from Europe landed a little later than expected this morning, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get to Randburg in time. There are no questions here. I'll proceed.
There is a question, Mpo.
Oh, okay. Please, thank you. I can't hear the question.
On the issue of risk orientation, I'm a little concerned that We are saying that the board is primarily reactive because they only look at the way you have pronounced it. I see this mitigation, but it
Yes.
came across as saying the board will only look at the risk after the fact.
No.
Once the executive has performed on it.
Right. No. The board creates a risk profile, and it is against and the governance part of that is by looking holistically at the risk profile and advising both before and after the risk has been taken. Obviously, certain risks don't even make it to the boardroom from a management point of view, but systemic risks, like if you're a bank, it would be the portfolio that you have of credit and loans, right? So what the board does is with management, set the framework for risk, and then as issues arise, they either speak about it beforehand because it is such an important risk, or after the fact because it is within management's domain to take certain decisions. So it's a symbiotic relationship. Thank you. So how does a board...
Thank you. May I pose my question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. You already are looking at the ED and the NED roles, and I would like for you, and I'm not sure if I'm preempting the rest of the presentation, to address when the chairperson of a board has to come and become a caretaker CEO, that segregation of duties and the conflict of interest, and who actually manages that process and oversees it to ensure that there is the integrity of roles. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I'm not addressing it in the rest of the presentation, so I'll address it now. It is highly unusual that the chairman steps into an executive chairman role. It is usually done under circumstances that the company will determine, and it is always done for a short period. Clearly, when it does happen, that suggests a whole heap of things have gone awry. The fact that you can't appoint one of the other executives, whether it's the COO, the CEO, in an acting capacity, while you're getting ready to replace the CEO, the fact that you don't have either trust in their competence or integrity, that is a big red flag. But as you say, it does happen. We're just counseling boards not to do that, but to do it only under extreme circumstances. Then the second part of your question was who supervises the chairman when the chairman has stepped into an executive role. This is when board behavior and board dynamics become crucial, and we'll get to board dynamics in a moment. From a formal structure point of view, the lead independent director would take on, let's say,
We have another question. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll just finish.
One more question. Sorry to interrupt you. Oh, you're finishing the question.
No, I was finishing the answer. So the answer was, the second part of the answer is the lead independent director takes on a senior role and basically chairs the board and, in this case, supervises the chairman who has stepped into an executive role. I see a question from Soraya.
Oh, yes. Okay, it says on the 98% board meeting attendance figures, is this not also influenced by fees for attendance, thus not necessarily for the commitment to corporate governance?
That is possible, but at the same time, a number of boards do not pay per meeting. They have a flat fee that is dispersed, either quarterly or every trimester. So it's not dependent on the number of meetings you attend. Some boards do have a per meeting structure, so your question has validity in it. But the majority of companies on the JSE, at least on the top 50, pay a flat fee for membership of the board and membership of committees. And your question actually raises the issue of the inappropriateness in many cases of permitting fee structures. Was there another question, or should I go on?
Yes, the last one from Palesa. It says, to what extent does board diversity play a role to behavioral traits?
We'll come to that. And if I haven't answered it satisfactorily in the section on dynamics, please raise it again. How does the board deliver value? It's through strategic alignment and oversight. We've talked about that. It is through composition and diversity. And diversity has two meanings. One is diversity of demographics, age, race, and gender. But diversity is also in the skill sets. It's in making sure that you've got the right combination of skills on the board. Culture and behavior. And the assumption is, sorry, let me just go back to diversity. We are diverse in a board so that we can bring different perspectives, skill sets onto the board. Culture and behavior, and that speaks to dynamics. It's how the members of the board interact in productive, constructive dialogue, both in the room and outside. The board also, through governance structures and meeting discipline, deliver impact, making sure that they are focusing the discussion on the right things. That's what we mean by meeting discipline. It's not necessarily the length of the meetings, even though that is a consideration. It's how the board disciplines itself to deal with the most important issues and makes sure that there's adequate time devoted to them. Lastly, very, very importantly, a lot of boards spend an inordinate amount of time reviewing the past, whether it's the immediate past or the near-term past. The most effective boards have a future orientation. They take as read the report on what has happened in the last quarter, but they then quickly pivot the discussion to the future that management is working on and providing the guidance and counsel on the future, on what to do in the future. And this is how, to the earlier question around risk, is it before or after? This is very much a before. If you talk about the future and you signal the possible risks, you don't just paint a glorious picture of the possibilities of the future, but you also look at the risks that certain actions may have. So our point is that an effective board isn't just competent in terms of we've got the right number of engineers, accountants, etc. But it is also coherent, curious, and connected. Coherent in that it has the right framework on the strategy, and its actions cohere with the direction of travel. The board is curious. It asks questions. It wants to know. And lastly, it is connected. In other words, the members of the board are aligned. They don't need to be best friends, but there's alignment of behaviors, there's an alignment of perspectives that keep them connected. And to some degree, the board, even though it meets only 3 or 4 times a year, when it's really humming, it's a team. And that's what we mean by connected. So now we're going to look at the 2 ways in which we assess boards. And I may not, in fact, I know I didn't. I may not have introduced Spencer Stewart, the company, well enough. Spencer Stewart is a global... Yes?
Sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. Just going
Yes.
back, I like the idea of the 4 C's. They're perfect. May I be bold enough to ask if it's possible to add issues of transformation? Because the biggest challenge with our listed companies is that they will always look for people who are not going to rattle the cage. Until we
Yes.
talk about transformation, board membership is just a mere administrative governance issue that fails to go beyond the challenges that we're sitting with in the country.
And this part here around diversity, right, speaks exactly to that. So that you're not looking only at diversity of skills, you're also looking at diversity of perspectives, diversity on race, gender, age, etc. And you are now assuming that because we've now got the right diversity of skills and demographic profiles, that the chairman can make maximum use of the diversity to the company's advantage. So coming to the behaviors of board members and executives. Spencer Stewart, as I was saying, is a global leadership advisory firm that works with companies to identify and develop their leaders. Identifying leaders means on the board search side, helping the company to find the directors who will add value to the board. And secondly, development means we work with boards to ensure that the structures of the board and board dynamics actually also work to the advantage of the company. So a lot of what I'm going to say has to do with how we assess directors for appropriateness and how we assess leaders that are on the executive floor. Let me skip here.
There's an online question.
Yes, please.
Can I? Okay. Mabekwane says, are there any criteria which are interchangeable between executive and non-executive executives?
Interchangeable. Yes, there are. Yes, there are. There are a couple of skill sets that are necessary for both managers, executive managers, and board leaders. And you'll see that at the end of the presentation. What we have here is a model of leadership that talks to the importance of not only having the right people on the board, but making sure that the right people work in a constructive way to achieve outcomes. At the individual level, we look at past career. We look at capabilities. And I'll talk about which capabilities in particular in a moment. Right? But we ignore at our peril capacity and character. So career and capabilities you can see. You can see that she's a chartered accountant and she has 22 years experience in digital transformation in banks. Right? So you can see that. And the capabilities, she's a strong influencer. But you ignore, and these are easily visible. That's why we put them above the ground. The factors that are less easily visible but are crucial because they form the roots from which the tree bears fruit. Our capacity, the ability to get into a new environment and grow, as opposed to come lock, stock, and barrel and just plant what you've known and do nothing about probing and stretching yourself. Character refers to style preferences. Are you a decision maker first and foremost? Are you a consensus builder first and foremost? Or are you a planner? So there are different character styles that make a boardroom effective. On the team side, the board as a team, what we can easily see is the composition. 9 board members, 4 of whom have mining experience, 2 are chartered accountants, and 3 have diverse backgrounds. That's composition, and that's the skill sets. Formal agenda is self-explanatory. What do we spend our time discussing, and why? But under the ground, you need to look at team dynamics. You need to look at trust. Trust is underestimated. Trusting a board member means you trust their intentions and you trust their skills and capability. Lastly, at the organization-wide level, there's strategy and structure, but hiding underneath our purpose, the mission, the why we are doing this, and the culture. So think of all of these as we go into the discussion of the actual behavioral traits. This is just a framework to make sure we don't leave anything out. Let's start with the behavioral characteristics of highly effective board members. The first one, and that we assess members on 5 characteristics. Remember, we're taking as read the composition in terms of skills, in terms of gender, in terms of other aspects of diversity and transformation. We are now saying, okay, we've now got our board, or we're now evaluating new board members. The first capability that we look at, or behavioral instinct, behavioral characteristic, is strategic insight and judgment, where the board member sees the big picture, doesn't get lost in the detail of the operations, and provides guidance and counsel, synthesizing really big and complex issues of markets, of customers, of regulators, They look at the external environment and synthesize a point of view and advise management on that point of view. And that's what we call strategic insight and judgment. The second one is independence of mind. Now, we're not saying people need to be lone operators, but they have the courage to dissent constructively. They will, of course, be open to persuasion. But first and foremost, they have independence of mind. And we have a way of evaluating all of these when we interview directors. Third, interpersonal influence. And that speaks to the inclusive dialogue. Can the board member who's appropriately skilled in key areas dialogue with the rest of the board members in a way that's constructive? Can you imagine an audit professional? And this is not, I'm sure there are many auditors on this call. I'm just using them as an example. An audit committee member who's technically brilliant, but cannot communicate his or her ideas to the rest of the board in a coherent fashion, and cannot use a couple of ways of influencing. Do they influence outside the room or inside the room? Do they influence using data only, or do they influence using collaboration skills as well? So it's the degree to which you can communicate and persuade your colleagues. Some people are persuasive. Others aren't, because they're only looking at the problem from one point of view. Third one is integrity, where the individual is transparent and acts ethically. And the last one is the inclination to engage. They are more inclined to contribute in a meeting. They are prepared for each board meeting, and they make an active contribution. One of the things that one of the services that we offer is a board assessment, right? And we often hear when directors review each other in a peer-to-peer context, we often hear, she is a really competent mining engineer with a really great track record in driving health and safety in the mining environment. But she only talks when there's a mining issue. There's an operational issue. When there's a strategic issue or a financial issue, she doesn't engage. So it's around people doing their homework and being prepared or able to contribute outside their sphere of expertise. So these are the 5 behavioral traits we look out for in non-executive directors, right? And you'll see a couple of them when we come to the to answer the question that I was asked maybe a slide ago. There are some characteristics that are common to both the way we assess directors and the way we assess executives. The two are strategic insight, and interpersonal influence. And you'll see these now in the context of how we evaluate the behavioral traits of high impact executives. and we have 6. One is driving results, and that is the degree to which they drive performance, seek outcomes that go beyond the ordinary without compromising on risk or ethics. The next one is acting strategically, and that's really the future focus and the degree to which they work to influence the future, aren't just, repositories of actions that have taken place at an earlier stage. The third one is leading change, enabling transformation in dynamic and complex environments. And leading change, you think of the word transformation there has 2 contexts. One is transformation of the company in its maybe strategic and operational guise. And the second one is diversity transformation. We look for executives who can lead change, who understand the emotional, the political, and the rational elements of leading change. Leading people, and that's the way, the degree to which they align their teams to the organization's mission and goals. The degree to which they mobilize energy in the organization. And lastly, second last, collaboration and influencing. They are able to work across boundaries, organizational boundaries. So can the operations director who sits on EXCO work constructively with human resources? Human resources does not fall under him, so he has to use a number of influencing techniques to get his agenda addressed by the HR team, and together they build a future-focused solution. So it's not relying on the formal authority in your division, but how you influence people that are outside your control. Think of the chief executive, who's got to influence regulators, whether that's the Reserve Bank, the health authorities, etc. And then lastly, building talent. Effective leaders leave a legacy of equally competent, if not more competent, people. They develop future-ready leaders and have succession pipeline. I'm getting an echo somewhere.
I've got a question. Is the echo still there?
No.
Okay. So in your work, have you seen congruence in terms of these leadership competences and the KPIs of a CEO? Because my experience is that the boards normally place emphasis on just the results. Just a comment around whether you've seen real effort going into making sure that it's a well-rounded approach in terms of what is expected.
Yes. So the results that are achieved are the result, pardon the pun, of these capabilities. So the results are the what that is achieved. These capabilities are the how they get those results. And often, maybe not as often as we would like, boards look at the CEO, look at the results, the performance results, especially in the near term, 1 or 2 years, and they give it a big tick, but they ignore at their peril how the executive got to those results. And usually what trips up an executive is not the brilliance of mind, it's how they led change, how they collaborated and influenced inside the organization and outside. So to answer your question, yes, there's congruence between how boards view the results and the manner in which the results were achieved. We spoke a little, or I intimated earlier, that board culture plays a great role and a really important role in coming to outcomes of the board. So we're just going to double click on board culture. We have a proprietary framework for understanding organizational culture, and in this case, board culture. And our board culture assessment diagnostic says human beings, both individuals and collectives, are best understood by their attitude or their preference for two things. On the vertical axis is their preference for change, where at the stability level, they try to control change and not let it go out of control. And that is achieved through careful planning, risk mitigation, and make sure that there's a consistent flow of activities that gets you to end results. At the stability level, they're also focused on decisiveness, the focus on results, having a focused agenda, right? And it is very much a no-nonsense style. At the top, on the horizontal axis, we have our propensity or preference for being with others. On the extreme left, we focus on individual pursuits and expertise. And at the other extreme, we focus on collective effort. The two quadrants that I haven't explained are the top left, the yellow one, which is inquisitiveness, where you are open to experimentation, new ideas, you explore alternatives. It's an agile focus. On the far right, or the blue, it's the collaborative style, which is focusing on teamwork, consensus, everyone having a voice, and the bigger picture. So what we do is we ask board members, both current board members and the board members who are being assessed for inclusion onto the board. We ask them to take a 20-minute online diagnostic, and that gives us a sense of their preference on one of these. We also give it to the board, then we can say the board has a inquisitive nature, primarily. This individual that we're looking to bring on is more under careful planning, steady as she goes, stability level. How do you make sure that the two work hand in hand? Any questions on the model? Okay, now let's see it in operation. What you then get after all 12 members of the board have completed the questionnaire, you get a sense of the culture of the board. And we've got 4 examples here. A board that is in the lower red corner is highly outcome oriented, decisive. A board that is in the blue, with this blue dot is process focused, governance, risk mitigation, making sure that the environment is safe not in the health and safety context, but just that we've got we plan ahead, we mitigate risks. That's our chief focus. On the green, sorry, in the top right-hand corner, it's a green board. It's a team-based relational board that is consensus-driven. As you can imagine, this board here in the red is not very consensus-driven. In the upper left-hand quadrant, we have a learning-oriented board, highly inquisitive. There's always an exchange of ideas. Board members, before the board meeting, call management and say, I've read the board paper. Have we taken this or that into account? Right? There's a new technology that I've heard about that comes out of China that does X, Y, and Z. It's an inquisitive board. It doesn't only focus on the processes, and it doesn't also only focus on the past. It looks ahead. So these are examples of 4 board cultures. Each one of these dots is a culture in the board, so that the new board member walks in knowing really what's going on in the board. Now, every board has all 4 of these characteristics. The question is, how do they rank those characteristics? And I'll show you now. Here. So this board, in this example, the current culture, it is decisive first and foremost. It looks for outcomes. Secondly, it is collaborative. They do so in a team-oriented, consensus-driven way. They are inquisitive, but it's not their top priority. They are disciplined, but it is not their top priority. So you can see the board has all 4, but it ranks their importance differently. What we then ask boards to do is say, okay, is this culture appropriate for your board? Is this culture appropriate for the near and long-term strategy and ambitions and risk profile of your board? In this instance, so we have the current culture on the left, their preferred culture on the right. And here goes. They still want to be decisive, right? But they want to dial up inquisitiveness. They want to hear management talking more often about alternative strategies, alternative technologies, experimenting. Even within themselves, they ask each other questions more than other boards would. So they've dialed up inquisitiveness. They've dialed down collaboration. It's now their 4th, where it used to be their number 2. And lastly, disciplined. Yes, they've dialed up discipline. Why? Because there have been a number of fatalities that they felt management, I'm talking about the mining environment, management wasn't taking due cognizance of. And so they've created within themselves an emphasis on discipline, both in terms of how the meetings are run and what we discuss, but also what we look out for in management proposals. We want to see processes followed. We want to see risks mitigated. And then lastly, they've dialed down collaboration because they've prioritized two other characteristics, right? What will be the result of this structured way of putting discipline up here? of this profile, 1, 2, 3. The board will be less inclined to have individuals who go off on a tangent and speak for 20 minutes and they ramble. It's a board that will still maintain mutual respect and active interaction. It'll be one that focuses or asks members to be more rigorous in their preparation for board meetings. And you'll see that they will be more open, and that's the inquisitiveness going up, more open to learn about the industry and the business. So this is how you use board culture to understand the behavioral traits that will be effective in your boardroom. I'll finish off with a statement, and then we can, if there are any other questions, tackle them. Right? Our insights, integrity, and influence and engagement matter most when they align with how we think strategy, lead change, inspire people, and drive results. So we're saying insights, integrity, influence, and engagement. Those are the behaviors, the characteristics that will drive end results that are congruous with your objectives. Diversity fills the seats, and this is diversity in composition of skills, fills the seats, but it's our shared harmony in capabilities and character that keeps the organization moving. The organization is the whole organization. It's the boardroom plus the rest of the organization. So it's emphasizing key behaviors, insights, integrity, influence, and engagement that are common to both executives and non-executives. The way they come together will help us produce a very effective board. An effective board that drives or helps management drive strategic ambition, mitigate risk in a number of ways. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions, anything you'd like me to go back to.
Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. I'm quite intrigued by the board culture slides and I guess the practicalities of how you go about changing that. I guess on the premise that a big component of a driver of that is obviously leadership, but also your members of the board and their own personalities and what they bring to the board. How quickly can you really change, the board culture in order to dial up this, I guess the elements that you want to dial up? I guess I'd also imagine that some of that is driven by where you are in the life cycle of the company and what you're trying to then achieve by establishing a certain board culture. But when I think about it, sometimes you probably need to replace board members in order to bring in a different culture, but it's not necessarily always easy if you're also prioritizing stability and continuity and all of that. So yeah, it's really about the practicality of being able to do that.
That is a very astute observation, which I'll try to answer in the following way. So each one of these dots here, right, is the behavioral trait profile of a director. Obviously, this is a large board. Okay, so we see that in this board, most of the members are orange, and orange is results and authority, or what we called in the previous, it's the decisive impulse that is most important to this particular board, right? There are a smattering of board members who are collaborative in style. There's one poor person who's out on a limb who emphasizes order and risk mitigation, orderliness of processes and risk mitigation. There are two members here who have an orientation primarily to learning, to inquisitiveness, right? Now, say this configuration of individual style preferences results in a culture or a team style that's over here, right? A team style that is primarily results and authority-based. Now, the board has a board dynamics or culture session, and they agree that the style that would best suit the business, based on where the business is, as you said, in its life cycle, in the challenges that it is facing, in the aspirations that it has. They say our dot should be here, right? Can you still see my mouse?
Yes, you can see it.
Yes. Okay, so we're over here in the top right-hand corner. That's where we want to be. So we've got a distance to go between our team style currently and our team style in the next 3 years. This is quite a departure, as you can see from the distance between the current team style and the new team style that is that we are moving towards. That means there's going to be a lot of work done in the 3 years. Rome was not built in a day. So they set for themselves a board culture journey, and it will have two key inputs into it. One you've mentioned: recruit people who have styles that are more in this zone here. But you can't, just turf people out 3 years into their current term. So what the second thing that you do is you show them what their style is. So we sit down with each director and give him or her their style profile, how they rank all of these things here. And we say, that is what is really important for you, and that's the style that you have enjoyed. Now, the board style is over here. How do you think you are going to make that transition? We have a discussion with them. We give them a few tips and tricks. It's not easy, but I think people who are determined to contribute to the board in a more effective manner will make the time. They will use their personal resources to make the transition. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Any others?
Thank you. No. No, there isn't. No more questions. Thank.
If I may, online, there is one from Brenda. Given the critical importance of board culture assessments for governance and sustainability, at what stage should these assessments be conducted considering that some boards have new members annually due to rotation requirements?
Thank you. The best time to do it is in the context of your board assessment. Right? So if you do a board assessment every 3 years, you might, well, what we encourage boards to do is to incorporate the board culture analysis into the board assessment. And what you would do is in a year's, so we finished the review and it says that the team style is here in 2025. The team style we're aiming towards in 2028 is in the top right-hand corner. We will do two things in that period. We will recruit when the opportunity arises, you know, based on retirements from the board. We will recruit people who are closer to this profile. We will also work on an agenda that helps us to make that transition. And let me give you an example. A board that wants to be more agile and learning oriented, maybe in this top right-hand corner here, right, will not only recruit people with a high curiosity, but they will structure the agenda around key questions of the future. Right? So you do it in two ways: recruit new directors, and but that takes a while because, you know, people aren't retiring for the next 2 years. But also, we are going to change the way we work in the boardroom. The chairman is going to be disciplined and keep asking management and board members to focus on the future, to come to the board ready to explore new ideas. That's how you make the changes over a 2 or 3 year period. Might take a dipstick after year 1. Ask the members to take the diagnostic again and find that, okay, they've made a move and we are now over here. That's still a distance from there, but we're making good progress. Year 2, we might be here, and if we're lucky, we'll end up somewhere over here over time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Siboni. Thank you to Mr. Thank you, Mpo. Thank you to all the ladies and the gentlemen, you know, for being on board here. I know it was a different program today, but we really appreciate your presence. Thank you, Mr. Mark, Natasha. I'll hand over to Judith.
Thank you. Carolyn did mention that we've got a few men online, so we want to acknowledge you and we thank you for attending. So we want to make an announcement. I'm sure you saw the artwork outside, and Natasha has generously offered us a raffle at 500 Rand a ticket, and the winning draw will be done at 2 p.m. If you want, if you're interested, maybe try your luck. I'm certainly interested. And Mark, we want to just really thank you for coming in at short notice, and we want to gift you something. So please don't rush out. To everyone else, thank you very much. Just want to acknowledge you and celebrate you for making time to come and learn, to come and be inspired. And I look forward to seeing you again. So let's keep the conversations going. I think we've come to a close. Sorry, we are 15, 16 minutes late. It's due to unforeseen circumstances, but thank you so much.